everyone, welcome to the Morbid Monologue. I hope everyone is having a good holiday season, as good as it can be. If you're watching this on the day that I'm uploading it, it's probably Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas. I'm feeling the Christmas spirit this year. I got my nutcrackers up and my Christmas lights, and I'm wearing my cozy poncho today. I made one for my mom and my mother-in-law for Christmas last year, and after that I was like, you know what? I need one. I need a poncho. So I made one, and it's got like these pretty little fringes, and it's just comfy and cozy, and I just like it a lot. So anyway, let's get started on this. It's been a little while since I've had an Abnormal Artist episode, and thinking about it, actually I've only ever done one Abnormal Artist. So we have some catching up to do for sure. Recently, while I was looking into serial killers, I started noticing a trend that a lot of them became artists while in prison, and it got me curious. I wonder how many killers there are in prison creating art, and what kind of art are they creating, and which of the most infamous killers are the ones doing it. This led me down an incredibly fascinating path of information that I just had to share with you guys. There's a surprisingly high amount of killers creating art in prison, apparently. But for this episode, I've selected the most interesting, in my opinion, as well as the ones that I could find the most information on. If I end up finding more later, then I'll do a part 2, but who knows? So one last thing that I kind of wanted to touch on before I get started with this is that in my last Abnormal Artist episode, I said that for this segment, I wanted to talk about artists that I think are doing amazing work and want to share with the rest of the world. Just want to make it very clear that's not my intent with this episode. I in no way admire the people I'm about to talk about. I just find the topic interesting and feel like there is some value in examining the subject. So, without further ado, let's dig in. The first person I want to talk about is the infamous Charles Manson. Manson spent 4 decades in prison, and I wasn't able to find a clear answer on whether he began creating art before prison or during, but he was a singer/songwriter before the murders took place, and wrote a number of songs including Cease to Exist, which was then retitled Never Learn Not to Love, and recorded by the Beach Boys, which is weird. And several of Manson's other songs were covered by various artists over the years as well. The art that he created in prison consisted of various images, and I'm not sure on the medium that he used for them. Some of them look like paintings, and others look like they were done with pencils or charcoal and pastels. But he also made a lot of these spider-scorpion figures out of yarn and hair, which to me are creepier than the paintings. A lot of Manson's work was sold online, and he also made money from other merchandise like stickers, patches, and t-shirts. It's speculated that Charles Manson was worth around $400,000 when he died, and I would assume this money came from a combination of selling his art and merchandise, but there are also a lot of people that would gift him money, so it's hard to know how much he made from his art alone. But one of the pieces I find most interesting for Manson is this drawing of clown faces in reference to Pogo the Clown, which, if you don't know, is also the serial killer John Wayne Gacy, which that alone is really weird. But wait, Gacy also painted a picture of Charles Manson. It's so weird. I don't know what to think about it. Are they friends? Do they admire each other? Do they recognize how ridiculous it is? I don't know. Now, John Wayne Gacy absolutely made money from his art, but again, I'm not sure exactly how much. He began painting in prison, and a lot of his work involved clowns, and specifically self-portraits of himself as Pogo the Clown. He also did a lot of the 7 Dwarfs, which is weird, but I guess not the weirdest thing about him. But then there's combinations of himself as Pogo the Clown with the 7 Dwarfs, and I can't help but wonder if there's an intended meaning to this by Gacy. And before I started looking into his work, I thought to myself, I wonder if Gacy and the original It are why people are so afraid of clowns today. And then I found out that Gacy painted a portrait of the original It, and just my mind was blown. I mean, clowns have never really bothered me, but I get why people don't like them, and this painting of Pennywise by an actual killer clown is some next level Inception shit. During John Wayne Gacy's time in prison, he sold 19 paintings and said they were intended to bring joy into people's lives. Some of his art was auctioned and sold between $200 and $20,000. But after his death, the rest of his work was auctioned off, and 2 men were able to purchase 25 of the paintings. The men then held a bonfire event that was attended by 3,000 people, including the relatives of the victims of Gacy, where they burned all 25 paintings. And, that just makes me happy. I'm really glad that the relatives of the victims were able to have the experience of burning his art, because there's so much art by murderers being circulated and collected just for the shock value of owning it. And I think a lot of people forget about the victims in these cases. I find a lot of this art to be unsettling, given the context, honestly. But there's one specific murderer whose art I find particularly unsettling, and that's the art by Andre Crawford. Crawford admitted to killing 11 women between 1993 and 1999. He's currently still serving life in prison for murdering, raping, and committing necrophilia. Now, it's not that I find all of his drawings disturbing. Most of them are your typical skull and satanic imagery, but there's one image in particular that I find haunting. Out of respect for the victim, I'm not going to show it in this episode. It's not that it's gory, it's just really fucked up. The drawing depicts a woman. She's screaming in terror with blood on her face, and above her are the words, "First kill." If your morbid curiosity gets the better of you, a quick Google search brings up the image I'm talking about. But looking at these images, one of my first thoughts was how horrible it is that serial killers are profiting from their crimes by making art in prison and selling it. However, here in the US, in more than 40 states, there are what are called Son of Sam laws in place that help prevent criminals from profiting off their crimes. Unfortunately, it seems like these laws do need some work. Originally named after killer David Berkowitz, who used the name Son of Sam, the laws were put in place out of concern that Berkowitz would sell his story to a writer or filmmaker. But the laws were controversial because people claim they violate freedom of speech, and the Supreme Court has ruled on some cases that the laws are unconstitutional, which, I'm personally a little confused on, and maybe there's something I'm not getting that you guys can help me out with in the comments. But my understanding is that the Son of Sam laws aren't preventing criminals from telling their stories. They're just trying to prevent them from profiting off those stories. So I don't really get how that violates free speech. The laws also help prevent the selling of mementos pertaining to the crime, but that seems a little vague and prone to loopholes, which has definitely created a black market for serial killer memorabilia, now actually referred to as Murderabilia. There are Murderabilia dealers out there collecting art and other items from serial killers or their families and selling it for profit online. Now, I will give credit that some of them are taking the money earned from selling these items and donating it to charity, which is great. I'm all for that. But most of them aren't. And some of them are just all around shady, writing letters to killers in prison posing as women, gaining their friendship in order to have the killer send them art as a gift, and then turning around and selling it online. And in one instance, serial killer John Edward Robinson, who was also a con man and embezzler, found out that he was essentially getting catfished by a dealer and sent them an angry letter expressing his disgust, stating that the dealer was a loser and preying on those in prison for monetary gain. Oh, the irony. Of course, everyone involved in that situation is horrible, but I find it particularly ridiculous that the serial killer con man is upset that he's getting preyed on. And worse than that, some of the dealers involved in this market don't stop at exploiting the murderers, but also target each other. Apparently, it's really cutthroat, and people have made statements that other dealers have threatened them to stop selling Murderabilia by posing their personal information, like their home address, online. And to top it all off, a lot of the art out there is fake anyway. There isn't really a way to certify or authenticate it because of the Son of Sam laws in place. And there is a lot of this art out there on the internet. And at first I was really surprised by it, but after thinking about it, I think there are some obvious explanations for it. I mean, there's not a whole lot to do in prison, and if you're serving a life sentence, you might as well pick up a new hobby. And I mean, I think art is the go-to for a lot of people because it can provide an outlet and an escape, and you know, anybody can do it. There's few resources needed. The most art I was able to find done by serial killers was by John Wayne Gacy and Richard Ramirez, who's also known as the Night Stalker. He was responsible for killing at least 14 people in the 80s, and he's one of those murderers who's oddly popular among people, like Ted Bundy. And I think that's why you see so much of his art online. There's likely a ton of fakes circulating though. But although there is a lot of information on Ramirez himself and his crimes, I couldn't really find any information on his art, other than just finding a lot of images of it. His art reminds me of Andre Crawford's art in terms of being disturbing. And again, it's not the skulls and satanic references that I find unsettling, but the drawings of women, given that he raped and murdered them. And yet, despite that, dealers and even murderers urge people to separate the art from the artist, insisting that the art has nothing to do with the crimes. But I think that's a far-stretched claim to make. A lot of this art isn't even very good, and in some cases it's just bad. It certainly wouldn't be selling for thousands of dollars on a black market site if the murderer's name wasn't attached to it. So, what are my final thoughts on this? Well, I don't want to shame anybody or condemn anyone for wanting to own this art, or if they do own art by serial killers or murderers, because I don't think it's necessarily wrong to own it or even want to own it. Where I become not okay with it is the selling and profiting of the art. People were murdered. The murderer should not receive a single penny from that. And I think the appropriate place for this art would be in a museum, or at the very most sold for charity. But I don't think I'd personally ever own a piece of art created by a serial killer or murderer. For me, I want to bring good energy into my house, and I feel like art created by these monsters undoubtedly has really negative energy. You know, I like to collect animal bones, and even with animal bones, I think it's important to bring home ones with good energy, and sometimes that means smudging the bones or just knowing where the bones came from and how the animal died. There isn't enough sage in the world for the art created by these horrible, incredibly dark people. For me, at least, I don't know. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think it's okay to own this art, and do you think it's okay for the killers and dealers to be selling it? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if there's a morbid topic you'd like me to talk about next, let me know about that too. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.